This episode is brought to you by Google Gemini. With the Gemini app, you can talk live and have a real-time conversation with an AI assistant. It's great for all kinds of things, like if you want to practice for an upcoming interview, ask for advice on things to do in a new city, or brainstorm creative ideas. And by the way, this script was actually read by Gemini. Download the Gemini app for iOS and Android today. Must be 18 plus to use Gemini Live.
This year, Santa's bringing the power of Energizer into his workshop.
Whoa, the Energizer Bunny's got so much power.
Wait, he's powered up all the toys. I think that means we're done for the year.
I love this bunny.
He's the hardest working helper the North Pole has ever seen. And he wants all your gifts to have the power of the #1 longest lasting AA battery. So this holiday season, stock up on Santa's and the elves' favorite battery, Energizer Ultimate Lithium.
This episode is brought to you by AWS. Amazon Q Business is the generative AI assistant that can securely understand your business data, summarize results, and streamline tasks. Learn what Amazon Q Business can do for you at aws.com/learn more.
What is up, everyone? Welcome to There Can Only Be One, the podcast that puts together the all-star best-of playlists of your favorite bands and artists, and a proud member of the Pantheon Podcast Network. Hello to all of our listeners in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands, and around the world. We've got us a return. This is our first ever Volume 2, because last year, at the end of 2023, we brought Brian Colburn from My Weekly Mixtape onto the show, and we did our first ever One and Done. We're talking about bands that only ever had one full studio album. And it was such a fun time that now, the end of 2024, we brought back Brian from My Weekly Mixtape to do Volume 2. Brian, welcome back to the show. How you doing, man?
I am doing great, man. Thank you so much for having me back for this one. The One and Dones are a completely different mindset than the usual There Can Only Be One format. And it's a challenge because instead of just having maybe one or two albums on a discography that you're pulling your hair out of your head, in this instance, we have 5. So it's these bands that we picked. You and I kind of went back and forth and we found 5 albums that we both kind of agree are ones that, like, okay, we need to talk about these albums. So these were not easy to sit there and come up with a single song from each one.
Yeah, and the other thing too is that normally on these things, on these shows, we're talking about just the one artist, which is all good because you're used to it. You know, you get like 5, 7, 10, 20 albums in, and the progression is gradual as you go through the chronology of the discography. But here, you get a different sound every single time. So you almost have to shift. And sometimes the albums, they work well together. And sometimes it's like a complete and utter left turn at Albuquerque. But I think we've got a decent mix of albums that work well enough together here.
I think these albums, at least the first 3 for sure, work really well together. And then the last 2 albums fit into the mindset, but they're a little bit of a veering, but not to the point where it's like a hard turn where you're giving yourself whiplash. I think it's a nice gradual change from albums 1 to album 5.
Yeah, we're not doing some weird left turn like going from Obituary to Sabrina Carpenter. That's not happening, although that would be the most fascinating episode of My Weekly Mixtape if we somehow went from Obituary to Sabrina Carpenter. There's got to be some way to do it.
There's got to be a format that would speak to those 2 artists. And if anybody out there can think of one, please send it to either Jason or myself, because you have my attention, that's for sure.
If that ever happens, I'm just going to be sitting there with the popcorn goes, what comes next? What comes next? Also, don't eat popcorn and listen to My Weekly Mixtape in the car. It's a driving hazard. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to take 5 albums, all from the 90s. And all of these artists only ever had one album. And we're going to go through each disc and pick only one song. And at the end of the show, From those 5 albums, we're only going to pick just one song. And we're going to start in 1990 with the only full-length studio release from Mother Love Bone, that being the Apple CD. Now, I do know that they have an EP that came out beforehand, which only had 4 songs. It also had the full Chloe Dancer Crown of Thorns on there that you heard from the singles soundtrack. Of course, you get Crown of Thorns on this disc as well without the Chloe Dancer. So we opted to skip the EP because at that point it would have only been 3 songs that you're kind of choosing from. This is the only full-length CD. The band at the time was Andrew Wood, Bruce Fairweather, Stone Gossard, Jeff Ament, and Greg Gilmore. It was released on July 19th, 1990, shortly after the death of singer Andrew Wood. It peaked at number 34 on the Billboard Heatseekers charts, but didn't do that until 1992. In 2005, Rock Hard Magazine ranked this number 462 in their book 500 Greatest Rock and Metal Albums of All Time. And in 2016, Rolling Stone listed this as number 18 on the 40 Greatest One Album Wonders list. There were 3 singles off of this one: Stardog Champion, This Is Shangri-La, and Stargazer. And this is one of those albums where, you know, it was hard hitting when it was released because people were still missing Andrew Wood. But then as Pearl Jam got bigger because of Stone Gossard and Jeff Ament, it got that extra second round, I guess, if you will, of attention. But your thoughts on the Mother Love Bone album as a whole?
Well, one, I love the album. It has that early Pearl Jam 10 sound, but Andrew Wood's vocals were much more in line with a Chris Cornell, and dare I use the word hairband, because he had the upper range that I won't say Eddie Vedder doesn't have, but Eddie Vedder's higher range is more of a scream, and Andrew Wood could sing in the upper registers really well, and almost the way Chris Cornell does in some of the Soundgarden stuff. It's again a different tone to the voice. This album, what I always found interesting is most people that I knew that had it growing up actually had the Stardog Champion compilation, which was both the EP and Apple put together on one CD. It just had Mother Love Bone written on it. And that was the one that most people owned because, to be perfectly honest, in our side of New Jersey and New York, Pearl Jam was our first introduction. And then came the, oh, wait a minute, Mother Love Bone has some guys from Pearl Jam. That's, like you had just mentioned, putting the album out, kind of the re-release compilation after Pearl Jam hit, was genius because it introduced us to the band.
Yeah, and even if you weren't really into the grunge scene at the time, but you were into movies, we all know that Singles is one of the best soundtracks that came out of the 90s. And of course, Chloe Dancer, Crown of Thorns was on that disc. And I know this was the first time I had ever heard Mother Love Bone. And then, of course, you start deep diving and you discover that there's really only one album to go through. So, Brian, I'm going to hand this to you to get us started on this journey. Your one pick off of Apple.
Well, the first thing I'm going to do is give you my 2 runner-ups because I love both of these songs so much. I had such a hard time choosing between these 3 after whittling it down that I literally had each of the songs in my only one pick, and I've kind of flip-flopped them around. But in the end, I have to give a shout out to Stardog Champion and Heartshine. I think they're both incredible tunes. Those riffs give you a precursor to what you would eventually get on Pearl Jam's 10, but with a, like I said, a different vibe with Mother Love Bone. But for me, my only one ended up at the end being Crown of Thorns, even though it doesn't include Chloe Dancer on this version. You had mentioned the single soundtrack, which is where a lot of people discovered Mother Love Bone, which is kind of the reason why, between the stories about this band having members of Pearl Jam and the single soundtrack, really put them in the music vernacular in 1992. But Crown of Thrones was also used in 1989's Cameron Crowe movie, Say Anything. And it didn't appear on the official soundtrack, but it was in the movie. That was remedied with the single soundtrack.
I mean, let's be honest. The only song people are really going to remember from Say Anything is In Your Eyes from Peter Gabriel, because there's a ghetto blaster involved. But yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And now I will say this. If we're talking specifically Apple, Crown of Thorns is only 6 minutes and 22 seconds. But if you have either the single soundtrack or the Stardog Champion release, you're getting 8 minutes and 22 seconds because of Chloe Dancer. However, out of respect for the fact that Chloe Dancer isn't on Apple, why that is, I will never understand. Because to me, those two songs are kind of synonymous together. They belong together. And that was why at some points I was swapping out Crown of Thorns because of the Chloe Dancer omission. But in the end, that song is just so special. Pearl Jam has brought it out over the years. It's on the Pearl Jam 20 compilation. I feel like this song continues its relevancy through the fact that Pearl Jam continues to acknowledge it. And I think with that, it's the one to go to for me.
See, I really missed the Chloe Dancer part of that 1-2 punch. That was actually my favorite part of that, especially with the piano in there. Yeah. And I had quite the short list on this one. I had This Is Shangri-La on my short list, Holy Roller, Captain High Top, and Man of Golden Words. And it was almost Man of Golden Words that was going to be my pick. But then you get, near the end of the album and you have this song called Gentle Groove. And if ever there was a song that delivered on the title, Gentle Groove delivered on the title. It was one of those slower to mid-tempo ones, and it just kind of sucks you in. Had Chloe Dancer been on this disc with Crown of Thorns, it would have been a no-brainer because Chloe Dancer really is, that would be my only one overall if we had like the full disc. But Gentle Groove, I think, kind of picks up where Chloe Dancer doesn't exist on this disc.
Now that you mention it, it makes me wonder, because you have Mr. Danny Boy after Gentle Groove. But I wonder if maybe they felt between Gentle Groove, Chloe Dancer, and Crown of Thorns, maybe the end of the album got a little too, I don't want to say soft, but you get what I'm saying, compared to the beginning of the album. And maybe I've always wondered about the omission here.
Yeah. And not to mention, too, Man of Golden Words is in that softer kind of sound as well. So you don't want to necessarily, I say you don't want to necessarily have too much soft on an album, but the Counting Crows did it with August and Everything After, and it was perfect.
Exactly. 100%.
So make the album what it's supposed to be. But yeah, no, I ended up going with Gentle Groove.
Come to me.
Focus Features invites you to succumb to the darkness.
Nosferatu.
From director Robert Eggers comes a masterpiece of horror.
He is coming. This creature is a force more powerful than evil. It is death itself.
Nosferatu. Rated R. Under 17 without parent. Only in theaters this Wednesday. Special engagements in Dolby and IMAX.
This is the sound of your ride home with Dad after he caught you vaping. Awkward, isn't it? Most vapes contain seriously addictive levels of nicotine and disappointment. Know the real cost of vapes. Brought to you by the FDA.
When your gut feels off, your whole day can feel off. Activia probiotic yogurts and dailies are a quick, easy, and tasty way to up your gut health game every day. They're deliciously smooth and creamy and packed with billions of live and active probiotics. Your gut is where it all begins, so start with Activia. Enjoying Activia twice a day for 2 weeks as part of a balanced diet and healthy lifestyle can help reduce the frequency of minor digestive discomfort.
Definitely related to this one is 1991's Temple of the Dog. This retroactive, I guess, supergroup, because this was created before Pearl Jam really kind of made it big, really started as a tribute to Andrew Wood, because the name of the band comes directly from one of the lyrics in Man of Golden Words, as we mentioned from the previous album. Released April 16th, 1991, the band was Jeff Ament, Matt Cameron, Chris Cornell, Stone Gossard, Mike McCready, and Eddie Vedder. The album peaked at number 5 in the US and number 11 in Canada, re-entered the charts, and hit number 7 on the top hard rock albums in 2017 after the death of Chris Cornell. It is platinum in both the US and Canada. There were 3 singles off of this one. Hunger Strike peaked the highest, hitting number 4 on the US mainstream rock charts. Obviously, anyone who has ever heard of Temple of the Dog instantly thinks of Hunger Strike. So now I'm curious if that's your pick off of this album.
Yes, 100%. Now, I'll preface with that was after some frustrating arguments in my own head, because Say Hello to Heaven is an album opener that simply can't be denied. And Four Walled World is grunge with a bluesy feel that you don't hear a lot. And the two shouldn't work together, but they do really, really well. But Hunger Strike, my God, when you talk about songs that resonate on a different level, this is just one of those singles that no matter how many times it's been played, no matter how many times I've heard it, I never, ever, ever tire of it. From the guitar riff to the sludgy chorus, the bending notes, everything about it is just absolute perfection. One of my favorite songs of the 90s. And it's taken on a new life over and over again through the years, because in 2008, on the Project Revolution tour, Chris Cornell came out and covered Hunger Strike with Linkin Park, only on the chorus, which I've always been fascinated by. Chris Cornell took Eddie Vedder's vocal parts, and Chester Bennington took Chris Cornell's vocal parts. So I guess you could call it a cover, because Chris is performing his song, but he's not performing his, which I always thought was a very interesting take on it, because you would just assume Chris would sing Chris's parts, and it didn't happen that way. And you can actually hear this version because it's on the Linkin Park Sounds from the Underground compilation. It's not on streaming, but you could definitely find it. It's on YouTube or on that CD. And then in 2021, because we're talking about covers, Daughtry and Lejean Witherspoon of Seven Dust covered this, with Daughtry taking on the Chris Cornell parts, and Daughtry just nails it. He does such a great job. This version, if you're looking for a physical copy, can only be found on Daughtry's Dearly Beloved CD if you buy it at Walmart.
Oh,
it
wow.
was a Walmart exclusive track. However, it is on all the streaming services. Only it's a single only for there. But regardless, this song hits with me. This song, at the time, I kind of came on to Temple of the Dog and Pearl Jam simultaneously. And I think Hunger Strike made me a bigger Pearl Jam fan and a bigger Soundgarden fan. And I'm actually stunned that this was the only time these guys ever did something. And unfortunately, with Chris no longer here, it can't happen. So it's a amazing one-off album.
I feel almost remiss if we also don't mention the 2011 release of Hailstorm covering this song on the Reanimate the Covers EP, because we've talked about that album on this show before. And I mean, if anyone's going to jump on those lyrics and those vocals, I mean, Lizzie Hale is probably uniquely qualified to sing pretty much anything that anyone throws at her. But yeah.
And she does the gender flip with ease. Like, she nails it. Like, even from the lower registers, she's got it all covered.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're talking about someone who was able to fill in for Skid Row and do Sebastian Bach's parts as good as when they were first recorded. So, hells yes.
Not gonna lie, if she were to do a full tour with Skid Row, I'd be all over that in a heartbeat. Like, I watched the YouTube videos of that several times and was just blown away. There was such a energy in those performances. You could tell she loved every one of the songs. And that's no disrespect to Eric Gromwell, because I think he did a bang up job. I actually really loved the album, The Gang's All Here, that he did with Skid Row, but I would have loved to hear a little bit more Lizzie and Skid, whether it be on a live release or something, because if you've listened to that Reanimate album, you already know how well she slays Slave to the Grind. And I'm taking us off topic here. Sorry.
Us off topic? That never happens. but just finishing that one up, though. Apparently, Lizzie Hale has said in recent interviews that when it comes to Skid Row, quote unquote, she can't marry them, but they can have an affair every now and then. So that they're not ruling anything out of Lizzie maybe doing something more with Skid Row down the road. But clearly, Hailstorm is, dance with who brought you, right?
Of course.
For me, off of this disc, I mean, it was hard to not pick Hunger Strike, but I also didn't pick Hunger Strike.
I knew you weren't going to, which is why I had to. That also factored into my decision.
I mean,
I'm saying this after you said it. I should have led with that, but regardless.
Right. I mean, I obviously was in my short list. Call Me a Dog was also in my short list, but I'm going to go with Say Hello to Heaven. And this was apparently one of the first songs that Chris Cornell had written with this kind of tribute to Andrew Wood in mind. So it kind of makes sense that this song, especially vocally, has probably the most passion and heart behind it. And I'm not taking anything away from Hunger Strike, but this song is pure Chris Cornell vocal goodness. And I don't want to say it's one of my favorite Chris Cornell songs, because, I mean, Sun Shower exists, and that is an amazing song. But Say Hello to Heaven is right up there.
I'll tell you, both Hunger Strike and Say Hello to Heaven are in my top 5 for Chris Cornell all-time vocal performances. They're both incredible.
Definitely a super group for our next one here. Mad Season and their Above disc. Released March 14th, 1995. This band was Lane Staley, Mike McCready, Barrett Martin, and John Baker Saunders. The album peaked at number 24 on the Billboard 200 and is gold in the US. There were 3 singles off of this one. River of Deceit peaked the highest, hitting number 2 on the US mainstream rock charts and at number 8 on the Canadian alternative charts. And I remember when this song came out, because when it came to like the big bands of Seattle grunge at the time, I was definitely in the Alice in Chains camp. So the fact that Lane Staley put this out, I'm just like, oh, this is awesome. I have to listen to this all the time. But your thoughts on the Mad Season project?
Well, you got to realize 1 year earlier, Jar of Flies was the EP. I mean, people just, at least people I went to high school with, talked endlessly about this EP. There was something about it because it was much, much, much different than Dirt was. And in a way where people that didn't listen to Alice in Chains before kind of came on and embraced them. It showed a different side to them. So when I heard River of Deceit for the first time, I honestly thought it was the next Alice in Chains song. Because when you would put the radio on, you'd sometimes pick it up mid-song. So at that time, there wasn't Shazam. You didn't have the text on screen telling you what it was. So you're just sitting there, and obviously you know Lane's voice. There's no mistake in it. And I'm like, oh, we've got a new Alice in Chains song. And at the end, and they're like, that was Mad Season. I'm like, the hell happened to Alice in Chains? Did they break up? Like, what's happening here? And I had to kind of figure out. But the story behind this album's incredible. The music on it. This is a very underrated supergroup. And God, there's so many incredible songs on this album. Now, I've already rambled enough to forget. Did you ask me to give you which one I picked from this, or?
Well, let me try this. Hey, Brian, what's your pick off of Mad Season?
Well, in contention was definitely River of Deceit and Long Gone Day, because that one is just, oh my God, it's so haunting. It's so beautiful. But at the end, I went with something that was haunting, beautiful, and heavy all together. And that is Lifeless Dead. If you haven't seen the Live at the Moor performance of Lifeless Dead, please pause this recording, look up YouTube, and watch it. I'll give you a second now to do that. Okay, now that your mind is still blown out of your head at the fact that Lane is hitting those notes with absolute ease, but with all the power and emotion that he so effortlessly brought to his vocal performances. This one to me always stood out. I probably wore, at the time I had it on cassette, I probably wore this part of the tape out. I think it played differently than the rest of the album. And that's zero disrespect to the rest of the album. But this song was like a vibe for me for a very long time in high school.
The other thing, too, is that if you've ever been to the Moore Theater in Seattle, it is an absolutely gorgeous venue. I got to be there for all of you Queensryche fans. If you have the Mind Crime at the Moor DVD, occasionally you can see my hand in the crowd because I was there, and it's a fantastic venue. It was so good. I now have to go and find that on YouTube to watch. River of Deceit was also on my short list, as well as Artificial Red and I Don't Know Anything. But I'm going with Long Gone Day because
nice.
This is something that just added much more musically. I mean, yes, River of Deceit is very much a vibe. Like, that is I'm going to sit down by the campfire with a warm glass of brandy and just chill the F out. That's that kind of song. But Long Gone Day, you've got xylophone in there. You've got, I think there's saxophone. Like, there's a lot in this song. And me coming from like I did orchestra in high school. And of course there was band as well. Like, so there's a lot of little musical earworms in this song that kind of like just takes off a lot of check marks for what you want out of something that's a little different than what you would expect from an Alice in Chains disc.
Yeah, it's definitely good that Mad Season existed, because I don't know, like, the only song that I think in Alice in Chains catalog that maybe could fit with Long Gone Day is the first half of Don't Follow. Fans of Alice in Chains come to expect a specific sound, and what they did on Mad Season was change it just enough so that way people didn't feel like Lane was just doing Alice in Chains 2 with a bunch of different people.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely a flavor to it that complements Lane's voice, but doesn't just feel like it's an Alice in Chains carbon copy.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. And I mean, this has got a bit of a like that jazz swing almost kind of feel to it. And keep in mind that above this 2025 will be celebrating its 30th anniversary. Now, obviously, we have lost Lane Staley, we have lost John Baker Saunders, so obviously you're not going to get a Mad Season reunion. But I mean, if Mike McCready ever wanted to call up, say, Mike Patton to try and do some kind of re-recording or at least a tribute show or something like that, because Mike Patton, I think, might be the only vocalist that I can think of that would be able to pull off everything that's on this disc.
There was the Sonic Evolution live show that they did back in 2015 that featured Chris Cornell on guest vocals, and they had like a mini Temple of the Dog reunion, and they did some Mad Season stuff. I think that's the closest we've ever gotten to something like that. And maybe because it's 10 years since then, maybe we'll get it again. I would love it if we did.
Oh, and please let Mike Patton, do vocals for that, because that would be fan freaking tastic.
I'm in.
Sticking in 1995, we go to Breathe by Loud Lucy. This band was Christian Lane, Tommy Farrar, and Mark Doyle. The album was actually produced by Brad Wood, who had worked with Liz Phair, Veruca Salt, Placebo, and many others. Ticking, which was the single off of this album, reached number 38 on the U.S. mainstream rock charts. Now, of the albums that we have talked about so far, most people have heard of Mother Love Bone and Temple of the Dog and Mad Season. Loud Lucy might not be as familiar a name to many others. So, Brian, fill us in. For those who don't know about Loud Lucy, tell us a little bit about them.
Well, they're a group that was out of Chicago, and their claim to fame, I guess you'd call it that, was being the opener on Alanis Morissette's Jagged Little Pill tour. So anybody that saw Alanis when she was in the middle of blowing up got a chance to see Loud Lucy open. And I saw that tour in 1996 at the Raleigh Civic Center in Raleigh, North Carolina. The place, if my memory serves me correct, 1,000 people, if that. It was not a massive place. And there is something about their performance that I will never forget from that night. It was different than what you were expecting from Alanis. It definitely had more of that latter end 90s rock sound to it, like you'd get out of the Refreshments. I don't want to say jangle pop because there's not much of that in there. This was definitely leaning more towards the Trippin' Daisy, the Super Drag, but not as power poppy. So it's definitely an alternative group. Definitely underrated. I wish these guys took off more. Ticking, I did hear on the radio. That was the one time I'm like, oh my God, it's starting to happen. And then unfortunately it didn't. And what a shame, because this album's fantastic.
Oh, absolutely. And I'll drop my pick now because I'm excited about this one. Because when you mentioned, like when we were trying to figure out which albums to do for this episode, you mentioned Loud Lucy. I'm like, whoa. I've heard this band before. But I didn't have the album. So I was trying to figure out why did I know this name? So of course this is the mid 90s and compilations are king. And I had this cassette, and I think I actually still have this cassette, Swag Volume 1. This cassette had so much on it. You had Garbage on here. You had Sonic Youth. You had Lisa Loeb and 9 Stories. You had Southern Culture on the Skids. You had Amy Mann. Like, this was a killer compilation that Geffen Records had put out. Loud Lucy was on this disc right before Maria McKee's Absolutely Barking Stars, which is a song that just had me floored the minute I heard it. But they had Down Baby on this CD, and that song is stuck in my head. Like, this is one of those compilations that felt like a core memory because, if you grew up in the 90s, musically, I would say grew up, you had a bunch of these kind of compilations, and this is how discovery really happened. And this was how I knew Loud Lucy. So Down Baby is definitely my pick because it was one of those songs where I'm like, I remember putting this on mixtapes and trying to get people to listen to it. I'm like, yeah, this is a great one. You got to listen to this one. This was a fantastic compilation.
Well, I didn't have the compilation. However, you and I, for the first time in a long time, have picked the same song. This was definitely my pick because the night we saw them in Raleigh, North Carolina, the first chorus happened. And by the second chorus, everybody knew the scream because the song was that infectious. It was an instant earworm. I also got to give a shout out to Ticking, though, because that was the first time I heard them on the radio. And Over Me, the opening with the drum beat, is so quintessential 90s. Those two almost came into the thought process for me. So I have to give a shout out to them. But Down Baby is the song that makes this album. I'm glad it was on that compilation. I'm pissed that it didn't get as much of a push on radio because I truly believe at this time, this song would have been very popular had they put something behind it.
Yeah, I was just so happy doing research for this episode because it reminded me of that Maria McKee song, absolutely barking stars. Fantastic freaking song. Now I need to find my copy of that cassette, because I remember playing the crap. I wonder if it still works. I think I've worn out the magnetism on the tape. We get to the last album of our journey. Maybe You've Been Brainwashed Too by the New Radicals, released October 20th, 1998. The band was really just two people, Greg Alexander and Danielle Brisebois. Now, Danielle Brisebois might be a name familiar to some, because before she was a musician, she played Stephanie Mills in All in the Family and actually won an Emmy. Also, Josh Freese, who now plays drums for the Foo Fighters, played drums on 2 songs on this disc. The album peaked at number 41 in the US and number 10 in the UK. It was platinum in the US and gold in Canada and the UK. There were 2 singles off of this one. You Get What You Give, which now all of a sudden people listening to the show like, oh, them. Hit number 36 in the US, but it actually topped the charts in both Canada and New Zealand, hitting number 1. I remember this song was all over the place. Like, it surprises me that it only hit number 36 in the US, because it got played a ton here.
I'm assuming at this point that the videos were not counting, because this video was all over MTV. I mean, people were starting to go out and buy the hat. He became known as the guy with the hat. And there's something about that video. It's such a moment in time. It's so 90s. It's everything about that latter half of the 90s musical sound. And yeah, the song is just, it's one of the best one-hit wonders ever, as far as I'm concerned, especially in the 90s, maybe of all time. Yes, I said it.
Yeah, you said it. You went there. All right, so off of Maybe You've Been Brainwashed Too, what's your pick?
I had some contention for this one, because the album opener, Mother, We Just Can't Get Enough, and then In Need of a Miracle are both great songs. But come on. It's You Get What You Give. Yes, I'm going with the single. Yes, I'm being Captain Obvious. And no, I don't care. Why am I doing that, though, you ask? In August of 2024, New Radicals released a cover of Sophie Ellis-Bextor's Murder on the Dance Floor. That was in August. Only been about 6 months. So who knows? They might not qualify for the one and done status soon. Maybe they're onto something here. I don't know. But in 1998, I worked at a music store. And this song was massive. Like I said, MTV, everything else. People would come in either asking for the song with the guy with the hat. And this was before Limp Bizkit, so we didn't have to decide which hat you were referring to. It was either Garth Brooks' cowboy hat or the New Radicals, whatever you call that hat, the beach hat, I guess you'd call it. However, people also came in asking for that song by Courtney Love and Marilyn Manson. And I would always stop and go, do you mean with the lyrics about, or do you mean a song by the two of them? Because the latter doesn't exist. You're looking for New Radicals. And again, just like Hunger Strike, as many times as I've heard this song, I never get sick of it. It is absolute power pop perfection. Like, as up there with Stacy's Mom and The Car's Just What I Needed. Like, this is power pop at its finest. And if you're not a power pop fan, I would not recommend listening to this album, because that's what it is. But this song is just a perfect snapshot of it.
I mean, I'm not surprised that he covered Murder on the Dance Floor, because, well, he co-wrote the song for her on that album. So really, does it count as a cover at that point?
I don't know. Technically, it's his. I guess you're right. It's kind of like when Prince put out Nothing Compares to You. I still consider Prince's version a cover of Sinead O'Connor, even though I understand that Prince wrote it. Sinead made it hers, and as far as I'm concerned, Sophie Ellis-Bextor's is Murder on the Dance Floor, but it was cool to hear New Radicals spin on it.
Yeah. I mean, Zach Malloy from the Nixons actually released 2 EPs called Lead Singer Syndrome Volume 1 and Volume 2 because, during that downtime from the Nixons, he was writing songs for other people. So he put out these EPs of songs that he helped co-write and basically did them himself. So sort of cover album, but it's kind of the same thing that what Greg Alexander did with the New Radicals here. I understand, though, why the New Radicals got so much airplay in Canada. And let me give you a bit of a snapshot of Canadian music around this time. This album came out in 1998. The year before, 1997, the Philosopher Kings released their famous Rich and Beautiful album, which went platinum in Canada. And that album, the Philosopher Kings were really known for having like a very modern kind of R&B jazz kind of style, but like very much for pop radio in the late 90s. And there's a lot from the New Radicals that kind of you can hear why fans of the Philosopher Kings would be into that. But also keep in mind too, around this time you're getting close to when Len's Steal My Sunshine comes out, so the New Radicals feels like kind of like that happy middle ground between Len and the Philosopher Kings, because you get a lot of, maybe 70s kind of influence in the music, but yet it's still modern enough that pop radio is going to play the crap out of it like they did. I had Gotta Stay High and Flowers on my short list, but I'm going to pull the Brian on this one, and I'm going to go with the leadoff track. I'm going to go with Mother We Just Can't Get Enough, because to me, this is the song that brings all the energy that you want for this album. I find you get what you give. After a while, a little on the dragging side, but Mother We Just Can't Get Enough. I know. But it just sits in that one pocket, and maybe because I'm Canadian, I heard way too much of it. But Mother We Just Can't Get Enough is almost like a perfect pop funk kind of 90s song that is a hell of an earworm. I'm surprised it wasn't a single.
I won't argue that one bit because it was on my short list, and I agree it should have been a single. But I'm thinking that you might have had some trauma. You bought the hat and it didn't work. Is that what it is? It's got to do something with the hat.
I do not look good in a bucket hat. It's not going to happen. Just not going to happen. All right. So now that we have gone through these 5 one-album wonders, Brian, it's time to narrow things down. So please remind our listeners what songs you picked from these 5 albums, and if there can only be one song from these 5 one-album bands, what's it going to be?
All right. From Mother Love Bone's Apple, I went with Crown of Thorns. From Temple of the Dog's self-titled album, I went with Hunger Strike. From Mad Seasons Above, I went with Lifeless Dead. From Loud Lucy's Breathe, I had Down Baby. And from the New Radicals, Maybe You've Been Brainwashed Too. You Get What You Give. And when it comes down to it, I probably made it obvious when I was waxing poetic about the song, but Hunger Strike is probably one of my favorite songs of the 90s and maybe of all time. And as much as I love all 4 of the other songs on this list, Temple of the Dog takes it for me.
This is the problem with this show. You have to choose just one. Off of Apple by Mother Love Bone, I went with Gentle Groove. From Temple of the Dog's self-titled album, I went with Say Hello to Heaven. From Above by Mad Season, I went with Long Gone Day. From Loud Lucy's Breathe, I went with Down Baby. And from the New Radicals, Maybe You've Been Brainwashed Too, I went with Mother We Just Can't Get Enough. I think they picked songs based on how long they can make the titles.
that was a thing before Fall Out Boy did it.
I was going to say, they went to the Fall Out Boy school of naming your songs, I think, at that point. For me, though, remember, when it came to Seattle era, I was an Alice in Chains guy. So, of course, I'm going to go with Long Gone Day because it is so good, so haunting, and I so miss Lane Staley's vocals. And Chris Cornell's and Andrew Woods. Like this is a haunting kind of episode because there are so many artists that we have talked about on this show that are no longer with us, but at least their music is.
Amen.
Now, Brian, before we go, please remind our listeners where they can find you out there on the interwebs and let them all know all about My Weekly Mixtape.
Well, My Weekly Mixtape is the show that takes the classic mixtape approach to building a modern playlist. And what it is I bring a guest on the show and we pick a topic or a band or a genre, and we create the ultimate 20-song mixtape based on that criteria. I also conduct interviews with artists, do album dives, song dives, and cover song dives. So it's a little bit of everything for the music fan, kind of the way you do spin, shuffle, skip on top of There Can Only Be One. I do the same thing over at My Weekly Mixtape. I think you and I have been doing shows for so long together. These ideas just kind of bounce. Oh, hey, I got a new idea for a show, and we just kind of plug it in. But regardless, you can find My Weekly Mixtape anywhere you listen to podcasts, as well as all the social media haunts at My Weekly Mixtape. And the easiest place to get in touch with me and find out more information is myweeklymixtape.com.
By the way, too, if you like both of our shows, you can actually find us both on Live 365. So if you're in the car or you've got your internet radio player, be sure to check out both of our channels. We're on there, and you can listen to some of our past episodes from there. Brian, thank you so much for this. And dear listeners, for our last real episode of 2024, thank you all for an amazing, amazing year. But until next time, you guys know the drill. If there's an artist that you want us to cover on There Can Only Be One, or a disc that you want us to cover on Spin, Shuffle, Skip, hit us up on social media at OnlyOneCast, or go to our website at notthatbadcast.com. And while you're there, remember that in 2025, we're starting to sell merch. So if you want to help support the show, well, you know what to do. Until next time, he's Brian, I'm Jay. You guys are awesome. This is There Can Only Be One, a proud member of the Pantheon Podcast Network. Take care.